Hi, this is Brett Ingram, award-winning digital marketer, and today I want to share with you 13 questions that help entrepreneurs solve problems. If only having the dream and the work ethic to pursue it was enough, our lives as entrepreneurs would be so much easier. It would be awesome if all we had to do is believe that there was something that we wanted to do or that we had this purpose to fulfill and that we were willing to put in the work to do it, and that's all it ever took. But unfortunately, as they say, nothing worth achieving is easy. And it's really true. We're all going to have problems at times. So every entrepreneur in every business, in every industry, in every walk of life, old, young, rich, poor, male, female, it doesn't matter. The fact is, we're all going to have problems. We're all going to have challenges and obstacles at times in our business, especially when we're trying to get things going, and sometimes even down the road as well. And they become inflection points, right? They become points where they literally sometimes threaten the existence of our business and our careers as entrepreneurs. I mean, for some of us, we may feel as though, if this one venture doesn't work out, then that's it. Like we're going to go back to work life or working for somebody else or whatever and sort of give up on that. So they can become bigger problems, bigger issues can become literally inflection points where we have to decide, is this something that we're going to be able to pursue and continue doing, or is this something that is going to, knock us out of the game? And so they can literally threaten our business, or the flip side of that is they can make us stronger. Because if we're able to work through them, then we're going to be able to come out the other side a lot stronger for it. Now, when these circumstances occur, depending on the severity, the situation, and all the other details, it's very easy to get emotional. First of all, as entrepreneurs, we're emotional about our businesses. They're sort of like our babies. Even if we have families, they're like an extra baby. Because it's something that we pour everything about us into. We pour all of our time and all of our thought and our energy and our passion into. And it's something that was a dream that's personal to begin with, right? So when that's the case, it's very difficult sometimes to separate anything from ourselves, from our actual business. And so when problems arise, it's very easy to get emotional about that and start to feel anxiety, start to feel panic or fear. Sometimes it manifests as doubt, right? We start to wonder, well, geez, are we really just pretenders? Can we even really do this? Or sometimes it's depression. You just get sort of depressed about it. I'm working so hard and it's just not working out. I don't know what's going on. The problem with all of those emotions, while they're all totally justifiable, totally normal, and totally common, is that it causes our minds to shut down. When you're in a negative emotional state like that, your mind isn't operating at its peak efficiency, in peak capacity. And so the problem with that is our ability to solve problems decreases. It shuts down that whole part of our mind where we're going to be able to be creative problem solvers. And what we need to do in the face of those problems, ironically and paradoxically, I suppose, is the opposite. We need to be able to be in a more productive and pragmatic state to solve those problems, even though it's really difficult to do that. The obvious thing is to be stuck in that emotional state, but that's the last thing that's going to help us. And so in those moments, the question becomes, how do we overcome our obstacles and solve our problems? When we're in that state, when something is really going badly, and we're the only one we can rely on, even if we have a team, even if we have other people, if it's our thing, then we're the only ones that ultimately have to make the decision and bear the responsibility. I had a business that was, brick and mortar where we were building custom PCs, and I had 7 employees. And when things were rough for us, I remember, the people that worked there, they certainly did what they could to help out, but it wasn't the same for them. They didn't go to sleep worrying about it and wake up worrying about it, because for them, if the job failed or the business failed, they would just go get another job. But for me, that was my livelihood. That was my lifestyle. That was, all of, my ego and all those other things that are tied into that and self-esteem. So it becomes really challenging. And we need to find a better way to be able to overcome our obstacles and solve our problems in those states. And so when we're trying to overcome challenges or solve problems, there are basically 13 questions that we can ask. And there are more than this, but this is a really refined, like honed down list. And they're broken into areas where I sort of take this in order. So the progression of the questions will help you start from, oh my God, the sky's falling, and be able to get to a point where you're actually getting things done to improve the situation. And that's the basic idea. That's where we all want to be. And so the first sort of segment is the ability to sort of define what the actual problem is. One of the interesting things about anxiety and fear and panic is oftentimes the root of that. Sometimes there's pragmatic things for it and real things, but oftentimes the root of that is the unknown. It's the unknown, it's the not knowing what is going to happen or what the consequences are going to be that cause us to feel that way. You get in trouble in school as a kid and you have to go see the principal. It's the walk down to the principal's office that's worse than the meeting with the principal, because you're thinking about all the possible things that can happen and can be said. And in your mind, you're going to probably make it way worse than it's going to be. I mean, depending, hopefully. So if we define it first, that helps alleviate a little bit of that anxiety. It might still be ugly, it might still be bad, but at least now we're facing what we've got. So to define it, the first obvious question is, what's the problem? What's the exact problem? And it might sound funny and counterintuitive, but at the same time, it's really important to actually define it. Because sometimes things will happen and we feel much worse about them than they actually really are. And when we actually sit down and stop and think about it and define what the problem actually is, it's sort of like, well, okay, that's not great, but it's not life-threatening, it's not that big of a deal. So defining the actual problem itself is the first thing. The second thing that we want to ask is it business critical? Is this a thing that ultimately, because again, there are things that we are emotionally tied to in ways that are different than the actual physical manifestation of what would happen or the ramifications of what would happen to our business as a result. So there are some things that we might be emotionally upset about. If I create a new product and I go to launch it and it gets a lukewarm response, I might be, really upset about that emotionally. But it doesn't necessarily mean my business is in trouble. Everything else might be going just fine. It might just be that, hey, this one was a single or a double instead of a home run. I mean, it happens, right? So is it business critical, or what level of importance is this thing really at? And that's another, super important question to be able to understand that. And then the third one in the define category is what matters most here. So once we've sort of figured out what the problem is and we've figured out how important it is, what is really the core of what the most important element or aspect of this is? Is it a revenue expense thing? Is it a branding image thing? Like, where are we with this? And what is the most important thing about it? So we can really focus on that. It might be a big problem like this, but the core of it might be like this, and that might be the thing that matters the most out of what we're trying to deal with. For me, one of the things that I had in my fairly recent past was I had an issue with my email marketing, and it essentially got basically shut off almost overnight. And it was a confluence of circumstances, and I've covered that on another episode. But the important takeaway from that, or the important point about that, is just that, I recognize what the problem was, and it was business critical because it's one of my central revenue streams that's continuous. When you create and launch products, you have spikes and troughs in terms of revenue and expense. When you have something like email marketing that gives you a consistent, steady flow. And so it was business critical to me. And so I had to figure out how to get it back on track, right? And that was the thing that was the most important. So once we moved past the defining problem or process, and we know exactly what we're looking at, the next thing that we need to do is we need to assess it. So the first question under assessment is, how did I get here, right? We want to understand the past. We want to understand the steps that led to where we are so we can understand and recognize, hey, is there something that I did? Is there something that I could have done? Is there a way this could have been prevented? Or is this, some economic situation where it was totally out of our control? It's important to understand that for a number of reasons. Number one, it can allow us to put a better plan in place in the future. Number two, it can allow us to sort of absolve ourselves of responsibility and stop, whipping and blaming ourselves if it isn't anything that we could have foreseen, right? And so, how did I get here? And then the second step of assessment is, what actions have I taken? Whether what actions those were led up to the problem, or whether those are actions I've taken since I recognized it started to be a problem. When I started to see my email sliding a little bit, one of the things that I did was I tried to use different autoresponder and email marketing tools, and I tried a couple of different things, and they were sort of like softball attempts at solving the problem. I didn't get to the root of what it actually was, like what was causing it at this point. But I at least had figured out, okay, this is what the problem is. The opens and the clicks are way down, right? That I had defined that pretty clearly. And I knew that it was business critical. So the next thing was, how did I get here? Well, I looked back at all of my own emails, and there was nothing that was obvious in there. There wasn't anything where, I was setting off red flags or getting blacklisted or any of those kinds of things. And so it was a question of, all right, so it's not really so much what I did, but then what actions did I take? So at that point, I started to take proactive actions to try to solve it. And the first initial steps were these little things that, had they just worked, it would have been one of those little hiccups and then you move on. But because it wasn't, that's what led into a bigger problem. Because when I tried to solve what was going on, it wasn't really working. The couple of simple steps I took didn't work, but I at least assessed it and acknowledged that, okay, these are the actions I took, they didn't really work. The other way to phrase it is, what steps have I tried? So if there's other things that we've done and things that we've tried to do to either solve the problem, we can take a look at that as well. And we can see what things, might have worked, and we can sort of document the results of what didn't work. So at least we start to get closer and closer to the target. The next question in that is, what changed or shifted? So was there something in the environment? Was there something in the economy? Was there something in my industry? What is it? Was there something in technology? And for me, one of the things that I realized is there was a shift in a technological solution, because one of the email providers I was using actually changed the way that they were sort of screening things. And so they were one of the culprits for slowing it down. Now, that wasn't the sole problem. It was more complex than that. But that did change or shift without my knowledge. And so once I evaluated that and I assessed that and looked at it, I realized, okay, this is what's going on. And this is the thing that I need to be able to fix. So I was able to at least get down a little bit more to the core. What's our constraint or limitations? So what if we know all this stuff and we're starting to assess, right? One of the obvious things would be, if you could throw resources at it, you could probably solve just about any problem you have. But what are our constraints or limitations? Because oftentimes we have some. If our advertising is no longer producing results the way we want, the answer, an easy answer, might be advertise more, right? Increase the budget, but that might not be realistic. That might be one of the constraints or limitations. Well, we can't spend anything more to fix this. So that's a constraint, that's a limitation. So what that does is it helps continue to assess and define not only the problem that we've got now, but our possible solutions, right? Because when we know what our constraints or limitations are, we know from the pool of solutions what things are going to be viable and what things are not going to be viable. There will be things that we can't do. I knew in my case, I wasn't going to be able to make any major changes. I had my email list. I had to be able to use that list because it's all the customers that I've had. And so I always mail the customers. There were a limited number of other, email marketing tools, so that was a constraint. I could try other ones, but I couldn't afford to burn them all out, because if I did this thing and I was making mistakes and messing them all up, then I wouldn't have any marketing thing to use. So I had to understand that too. I had to make sure that when I implemented a solution, it was one that could be long-term for whatever platform that I was using. And so, those were certain things that I was looking at. The third step is when we start to shift more toward the positive and proactive. We sort of know what our problem is. We've assessed what our sort of pool of solutions are, or at least the things that we know we can't do. So the third step in this is basically to start the plan, create the plan, right? So the question we ask about that is, what's the way forward? Anytime we're stuck, right? This is a very open-ended, very broad question, and it's that way on purpose because we don't want to put limits on what we're thinking. We don't want to put limits or constraints on what we're going to consider as ways to solve the problem. Sometimes the solution is not the obvious one. When we're sort of have our head down and we're working and we're plowing ahead, oftentimes all we see is the road right in front of us. So when there's a roadblock there, we're just looking for, hey, how can we get past this roadblock? There might be an airlift right next to us that we didn't see. We could jump on and blow past that. And so that's why we want to consider what's the way forward. We want to ask that to ourselves in a very open-ended way. So we get the creative juices flowing. We have an opportunity to sort of really brainstorm and think about things that we could do. The next thing, once we start to zero in a little bit on courses of action, is how can I break that down into smaller steps? So if we have sort of a solution or a problem and we're trying to figure out what our answer is to this, we want to try to break that down. So, if we could break down the problem into smaller steps, so we could break down the solution into steps, everything becomes a lot more manageable. The example of this, again, from my own experience, is that when I recognized that this one email provider out of the 3 that I use was the one that was causing this major problem, what I was able to do is focus on that one. I was able to take a look at what they look at. I was able to work with their support team and figure out what the issues were, how to resolve this, how to increase email deliverability, and I was able to figure out from a general perspective how email deliverability works. So that way I could understand what I needed to do. And so by breaking it down into smaller steps, instead of being overwhelmed by the whole idea and then saying, well, I've just got to fix the email marketing, what I did was I said, okay, how do I figure out with this one particular service, how can I solve that first? Then I'll look at the other 2 because they didn't have as major problems, but they weren't as effective either. So then I needed to look at those as well. But I focused on the one and started with that. And then the next question is, how can I make the most of the situation? So whatever we're in, whatever, however bad it is, and whatever our possible problems and solutions are, we want to think about from a positive mind frame and a positive mindset. How can I make the most out of this, right? Is there something that I could do that's going to actually turn this into an opportunity instead of a challenge? And that's, again, in my situation, what I did is I said, okay, I'm going to become an email marketing expert. That's how I'm going to make the most out of the situation. And I'm going to do that for 2 reasons. Number 1, I'm going to fix this problem. And number 2, actually 3 reasons. Number 2, I'm going to prevent it from ever happening again. Because if I know what's causing it and I get to the root of it and I understand how this all works, I can set systems up so they work and I don't ever have this problem again. But 3, I resolved to have my email marketing produce better results than it did before. I was sort of going on autopilot and it was doing well, so it wasn't broke, so I didn't try to fix it, right? Once I had the problem, I said, okay, fine, you're going to make me address this? I'm going to address it. But when I do, I'm going to make it better than it was before and more profitable. It's exactly what I did. It took a while, but I was able to work it to a way that I have it optimized. And, knock on wood, of course, everything's always dynamic, but I have it optimized and I actually have it producing more than it ever did. So that's how you can make the most of the situation. What's the most effective thing for me to focus on? So if you have a number of different things, you've broken it down, there's 6 different problems or things that need to be addressed. What is the most effective thing for you to focus on right now? For me, it was that one service, because that was 50% of my email marketing revenue. So I knew if I could fix that one and fix it, I could at least get things back on track enough that everything would be fine. I could fix the other ones in due time, but that was the one most effective. When we try to focus on all of them at once, we get overwhelmed and we aren't effective at dealing with any of them. By breaking it down and focusing on the one most effective, the thing that's going to have the highest impact, that's the thing that we're going to be able to do. And then what is the outcome I want? And this is what I did in terms of wanting to be able to make it more profitable than it was before. I said, okay, if I'm going to need to spend time on this, and I'm going to need to fix this and optimize this, I'm going to do it in such a way that when I come out the other side, it's going to be better than it ever was. And that was the outcome that I wanted. Even if I didn't achieve that outcome, I did, thankfully, but even if I didn't, with that as my mindset and my attitude, it puts me in a much more stronger position to be able to solve the problem, and it also sets up my results to be far better than they would have been otherwise. And then the fourth step of all of this, where the last group of questions falls in, is the execute part. Once we know the problem, once we know that the possible solutions, we've assessed all of that, and we've created a plan, now we need to execute it. So the first question there is, what's the most impactful action I can take right now to solve this? And that's exactly how we work it down. It's the only question in this category. What is the highest impact, most effective thing I can do right now? And then do it. It's that simple. You do it. As soon as it's done, we ask the question again, what is the next highest impact thing I can do? And we go on and on and on until we start to get down to the nitty-gritty of the little stuff that might make small improvements, but we knock out all the big stuff early so we're in the strongest possible position to be able to be successful, solve the problem, and actually come out of it feeling more empowered than we were when the whole thing started. If we have the right mentality about this and the right approach, problems and challenges in our businesses can not only not knock us down, but they can also build us up, make us stronger and more resilient. And that's where the real power of this is if we handle it the right way. So when we remove the negative emotions from the situation and we focus on what we can control, we set a positive sequence of events in motion and we start to build positive momentum. Small wins lead to more small wins, and like every challenge in life, we need to take it one step at a time. It's the only way we ever get there. We could follow this simple process for any business problems and actually, to be honest, life problems too. So the takeaway here is that every entrepreneur's journey will have its problems, challenges, and roadblocks. It's inevitable. It's natural to feel anxiety or panic in those moments, but it's also important to recognize that we don't function at our best in those emotional states. When we shift the focus to problem-solving questions, we get ourselves back on track and can take steps leading to a solution. The more we do this, the better we get at it, and the stronger our belief and resolve become.